Welcome back to Hope Folks to another episode of Youth in Conservation. Today I'm joined by Jack Baker, a fellow podcaster and the voice behind Pangolin, the conservation podcast, among the many things Jack does in the conservation space. I first met Jack back in September at the National Museum of Scotland, and I was genuinely curious about how he does what he does, especially his approach to storytelling and conservation communication. That conversation, folks, left me with a lot of ideas and a very clear thought that I had to have Jack on the podcast. And well, manifestation works because here we are. In this episode, we talk about conservation in all its complexity, Jack's journey, his podcast, wildlife podcasting, and a deep dive into wildlife education. We also touch on topics that are not discussed enough but, in my opinion, absolutely should be, like the intersection of politics and conservation. I genuinely enjoyed this conversation, and it's a must listen if you are interested in wildlife education, conservation communication, and learning from lived experience. Jack shares his insights and lessons from years in the field. I hope you enjoy this conversation, and if you do, don't forget to follow me, Jack, and Pangolin, the conservation podcast, for more thoughtful stories from the world of conservation. So, thank you so much, Jack, for doing this. I really appreciate you taking out the time.
No, thank you so much for having me today. I'm so excited to be here. I'm so excited to chat to you once again, and I'm really excited to dive into all of the wonderful topics that we have lined up to discuss today.
Also, before we get going, I honestly had something else to thank you for. So, you remember, like last time, we were talking about me getting into podcasting again and all those problems I was having. So, I just thought that it really hit me that you have been doing podcasting for like 5 years now,
Yeah.
and you have done like more than 100 episodes. So, obviously, it's not for seeking external validation or followers or people. You do it because you really want to do it. And it made me think, like, why the hell I have not been doing it? Why have so been? Because I was really stuck with getting it perfect with the video and the audio, and I was like, if he's doing, like, I should really look forward to that and just do an audio podcast, and then let's see if I can do video sometime later and just go about it. But I really need to start at this point. So yeah, you were the inspiration to like get me started again, so thank you so much for that.
No, thank you. That means the absolute world. Everything I do is to try and make more people want to be involved in conservation or raise their voice or take action or do their own thing. And so it's very and sometimes people message me on Instagram and tell me these things or whatever, but like it's so rare you actually get to see the like fruits of the work and the efforts that you put in.
Yeah.
And yeah, that means so much because yeah, so often things are reduced to like numbers on a screen and you never get to hear these stories. And like yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, yeah, but I like you have a brilliant idea. You have an amazing thing. Maybe I was an inspiration along the way, but it took you coming up with the idea to actually do it. So no, that's thank you so much for that. Thank you.
That's true. So you're a podcaster yourself. You have done so many episodes. I know you are a person who loves to listen to a lot of stories. But what's your story? Like, where did it all start for you?
Yeah, so I guess in terms of like conservation and nature, it's something that I have always loved throughout my whole life. I remember being somebody who wanted to be in and around and about nature. I remember being the person who like forced my parents to the zoo in high school. I wanted to be and I was in the scouts and I wanted to be doing like all of the hikes and all of these amazing things. So I like have always wanted to be in and around nature. And then for a while I think I ventured off that path and I was like, oh well, like a lot of feedback I was getting was like, oh, you should do things that are like careers or jobs or real jobs in quotation marks of like these things that will make you money and you'll have a career and you'll go to an office and you'll do these things and and do a very set path. And I kind of then when that was happening throughout high school and undergrad at uni, I pushed it all away and was like, okay, this is a hobby, this is nothing. And then yeah, I eventually found my way back and had to make some tough choices about like what I was going to do and where I was going to go, and eventually made it to this point where yeah, I'd gotten to the point where I I could start making a podcast. I'm giving you the very condensed version, so
Yeah,
you can ask me to expand on any of this.
sure.
And then eventually, I got to the point where after my undergrad, I kind of switched up my life. I was like, okay, I've been inspired to go into nature to do things. I'm going to go and do a degree in conservation. And as part of that degree, that's where I learned about podcasting, and that's where I got the opportunity to podcast. So that's where that came into my life. So yeah, nature and podcast. Nature's always been there. Podcasts came a bit later, and then they all kind of smooshed together, and
Yeah.
that's where the story went. But that's a very condensed version of that story. I didn't want to take up. I don't know if you want to hear my whole life story, but yeah, that's where we're at now.
Yeah, but like if not conservation, then what did you want it to do?
So yeah, so in high school, I was told like it was kind of like given the advice of do what you're good at, right? And so I was good at a subject called modern studies,
Okay.
which is essentially politics and modern history and that kind of that kind of stuff. So I was good at that, and so at uni I was encouraged to go and do international relations, and so for a while I kind of thought that would be my path of like maybe working in the civil service or doing something around that kind of stuff. Um, and yeah, it got to the end of that, and I think I kind of had this panic and this realization, like that's not what I want to do.
Hmm.
That's not who I want to be, and I'm going to be really sad my whole life if I sit in an office in a government building and do these things because, like, yeah, I'm good at it, but it's not what I love. Um, and I think around that time, like I'd worked in an aquarium throughout my whole undergrad to kind of get a little hit of nature every now and again, and then I didn't know what to do, and it got to the kind of end of I was reaching the end of my fourth year of undergrad, and I had this moment where I was like, hang on, like um, I have to make a choice now. Do I follow this path that I'm on, or do I do something else? And then I went to the Highland Wildlife Park that winter, like just before my last semester when I was writing out my dissertation and stuff. And I saw the little baby polar bear that they had up there at the time, Hamish, and his mother Victoria, kind of running around in the snow and ice and playing around. And in that moment, surrounded by the Scottish Highlands, looking at this bear, I was like, oh, this is where I want to be. This is what I want to do. And I kind of changed direction from there. And so yeah, like the path was originally going to be this politics and international relations route. And I think that's still very important for conservation in nature, and having
Hmm.
those skills have been very useful. But um, yeah, it wasn't my story. It wasn't my pathway.
That's very interesting. But what drives you today to stay in conservation or to do what you do?
Mm-hmm. Um, I think about this a lot. I think I once I kind of switched over, I think, into being in this field, I think it comes with challenges and it comes with rewards, right? And it comes with these things where you're like, it can be stressful and there can be bad news and there can be all these things. There can be all of this kind of stuff going on in the world that you don't want to hear about. And I think that's amplified a lot of the time by media and negative kind of voices who are in positions of power, like this kind of narrative that it's a bad place to be and it's a bad, that it's all that whatever. Um, but for me, I think there's a couple things that I remember to keep me in this path. I think the first thing is the power of community. I think the conservation movement and the community that is around it is so loving and so empowering and so inspiring. And like hearing your story about starting this was inspiring and gave me a boost and encouraged me to keep going. Hearing about my friends all over the world who are doing incredible stuff, whether it be here in Scotland, where I'm from. I have amazing friends like Katie Monk, who's doing incredible work and hiking the length of UK to raise money for charity. I've got friends like who else have I got? There's so many. Alicia Hayden, who's doing incredible wildlife artivism. I've got my friends Connor and Steph, who are creating incredible podcast content. I got all these people here, and then I've also hear about these amazing stories from all around the world, where I've got friends in the US who do incredible community building for queer people in conservation. I've got friends in Madagascar who reach out to me every year to celebrate World Lemur Day. I've got friends in Brazil and in Asia and Australia and all of these places feeding me these stories, and this community always keeps me going. Um, and then I think the other thing that I always kind of remember to keep going is like this is exactly what little Jack would have dreamed of, right? And I think, like, it is so rare that you get to live out your dream, and it's so rare that you get to do these things that you want to do, and it's so rare that you get to kind of, I don't know, be lucky enough to be in a position where you can do what you kind of always dreamed of doing. And it has taken a lot of hard work, and it's taken a lot of challenges, and it's taken a lot of sacrifice and all these things. But to be in this position now, I'm like, this is exactly what that little boy would like. He would look at you now and be like, you made it and you did it. And like, I think that's something I remember, no matter the anxiety or the stress or the fear that I have. Like, those are the things that keep me going. That, like, looking backwards and also feeling elevated. And also looking forwards, I guess, as well, because I feel like the future is bright and the people I know around me are bright and the work going on around the world is bright. So, yeah, all of those things keep me going and keep me motivated. And there's so much more than that, but those are the ones that come to the top of my head right now.
Well, that's a really beautiful thing. But something you said before about how policies and politics is really important, and I won't go into the depths of politics or anything or take any side, but
Mm-hmm.
in general, I was having this conversation with one of my friends the other day about how, like, when someone really wants to do something in conservation, but politics or politicians become a hindrance for you to achieve that. So what do
Mm-hmm.
you have to say about that? Like, how do people figure out a way out of it? Because, like, they're still going to stay there, but how do we convince them, or how do we still go about doing good for conservation?
Mm-hmm. So, with like the political
Mm-hmm.
barriers and things that are in place, I think that's a really good question. I think it's an important question, and it's something that, like, I'm hyper aware is a big fear for a lot of people, because like yeah, like, I have been lucky. I was lucky enough a couple months ago to speak at a youth event in near my hometown, and some of the, like, kids, like high school kids, came up to me and were like, "We really care about this, and we really love um, nature and wildlife, and we want to act for climate, and we're doing these things in our schools, and we're doing this, and we're doing that, and we're doing the next thing." And like this incredible, reeled up this incredible list of work that they were doing, and then they went, "But like, when people like the president of the United States or whoever it is stand there and so openly voice concern, or like just flat out lies about climate or environmentalism, how are we meant to make a difference?" And I think the thing that I said to them, and I wish it was a really good question that took me aback, and the thing that I said to them in that moment, kind of thinking off the top of my head, and I'd still stand by this as an answer, is like, there have been ignorant, nasty, awful, ill informed, maybe sometimes well intentioned, but uh, not in the right direction, people across the political spectrum and in positions of power for the entirety of my life, for the entirety of my parents' life, and for the entirety of generations past. And if those ignorant people had always had their way, we would not have the world we have now, which is a world where there are spaces that are open and caring and loving to people who in the past would not have been able to be cared for in that way. There are communities that have been built up because of the community spirit and power. There have been conservation projects that have changed and species that have come back from the brink, and all of these things that have moved forward because of the dedication, passion, and power of conservationists, people who care about wildlife, people who care about the natural world. And so what I always remember is, like, it's kind of like that schoolyard bully thing, right? Of like, there is that sometimes these big political structures in place, but if you keep working and work out how to play the game and work out how to work around them, then you can make the world a much better place. And I and like, yeah, and I think it's something that, like, it doesn't make it any easier, right? And it doesn't make it easier if for the 4 years of someone's term or whatever it is that they they're in positions where they can make big scary decisions that are awful and stupid. It doesn't make it easier, and it doesn't mean that, but it also doesn't mean that we should give up, and it doesn't mean that, like, I am not, like, I don't think anybody should give up just because political systems are difficult to work with. um and those political systems change over time. The people in power change, and if you show that your these causes matter to you, then you know you can over time make a difference, even if it feels like this insurmountable monolith. Sometimes I don't know. I think you can. I don't know. Is that what do you think? Is that something you have thought a lot about, or is it?
I do think a lot about it nowadays because when like I've been reading a lot of stuff that happens in India with politicians. Like I'm not sure how much I should be saying about it, but it really
Mm-hmm.
disheartens me to see like some of the people in India who have immense power, but like they're so illiterate, uneducated, and ignorant about not just climate but just humans in general. And it disheartens me. Like, how are you guys reaching there? And if you've reached there, like, can't you see how many people actually rely upon you?
Mm-hmm.
But how I convince myself is by just saying that like how conservation is not just about some sunny days every single day, it's also about going through those bitter situations or circumstances but still staying there. So I believe like
Mm-hmm.
all the great conservationists I have followed, that's what they have always done. They have just been true to their intent and passion for conservation, and that eventually does bring a change, because you might not change the perception of a politician, but you can change the perception of thousands other people who can then
Mm-hmm.
raise a voice against politicians. And at some point they have to listen when all the people who are actually voting for them are talking about climate change or nature education. So I believe that we should just stay at it and just keep voicing our opinions about it, because if we don't, then obviously that they don't have any incentive to act upon it. So if we
Mm-hmm.
lose, then obviously we have lost the bigger game. So we need to keep going, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's a really tricky one, and it comes from like I know I'm talking and speaking from a position of like great privilege of where I am and the opportunities I've been afforded, and the governments that I have had to deal with are like in the grand scheme of governments like awful ignorant people sometimes, but they are not the most evil that are on this earth and around this planet. And it is challenging, and it is also something that I think about a lot of like how can I make these waves in my local community, and how can I make these changes in my local community while also, I don't know, trying to help and recognize, and where I can raise up people who are in position where they it is more challenging, like it is, because they don't have the political systems in place where they can exercise a right to vote in the same way that I can, or have a platform in the same way I can. And it's a tricky conversation to have. But it's something that I don't know. I don't necessarily have a good solve or answer. And if I did, I'd be shouting it much louder. But yeah, it's an interesting one that I think. Yeah, I don't know. I think I keep going because I have faith that people are good, and I have faith that the masses will turn and will realize, like, you
Agreed.
know.
That's true. Yeah, I also believe like as much as I really want to bring the change needed as well, I just enjoy being in wildlife conservation. Like if I enter a room with wildlife conservationists, I don't know, I just have this weird sense of, oh, I'm home, and it just feels so good. So that's something that keeps me going as well.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, good.
Oh no, I was just agreeing with you.
Lovely. So, like, you have a lot of these conversations about issues in conservation and just in general some really interesting conservation stories on your podcast as well. That's something. Do you want to talk about that?
Yes, so I guess for anyone who doesn't know, my name is Jack. Once again, and I don't know. I go into this like this spiel about it, where I have to introduce myself. So I'm Jack, and I'm the host and creator of Pangolin, the conservation podcast. As I said, that started as a university project 5 years ago now, which is scary. And it started off as a celebration of the pangolin. I needed at that time to create a podcast as part of a piece of coursework for uni, and I heard the pangolin story of this kind of crazy, weird, unique animal that is so different to anything that else in the world, but so underappreciated and so underloved and so not known. Right? Is the world's only scaly mammal. Some of them climb trees, some of them live in burrows. They are bizarre, wonderful, incredible things. But also, they have this really interesting conservation narrative behind them, where they are one of the most trafficked animals in the world. They are affected by climate change and habitat loss and habitat fragmentation, and nobody really knows like about them still, and it's this interesting, powerful story. So from there, I kind of put this episode series of podcasts together, uploaded them to social media and stuff, and was like, okay, cool, that's that job done. And yeah, and from there, people listened and listened and listened, and they really cared and engaged, right, with this story that was underappreciated and strange and nuanced and a bit weird and a bit crazy. And so I kind of took that ball then and ran with it, and it expanded Pangolin into a celebration of all of these underappreciated, misunderstood, bizarre creatures, right? So the show celebrates weird animals, weird wildlife, things that people don't really know about, species people don't really know about. It sometimes celebrates animals people think they know. So things like giraffes are the example I always give of like animals that everyone loves giraffes, so they must be well protected, but they're not. So like trying to reframe these stories that people think they know, or talking to people about weird and wonderful ways of doing conservation, or like hearing people's experiences about how they made it into the conservation space and kind of creating space for their stories. So in that case, we'll hear about people who do music for conservation, or do art, or do write stories or poetry, or build community in a really interesting way. Or I'll talk to people like every month in June, every year in June, I do a Pride series where we celebrate LGBTQ plus people's role in the conservation space and kind of try and tell those stories. So the show is a bit of a mishmash of all of those things, but all under this banner of underappreciated, misunderstood stories with the Pangolin as the title, to kind of, because to me it is still the most misunderstood and the most bizarre and the most strange. So yeah, that's where we're at with all of those things, and it's a crazy, strange, bizarre ride, but I love it. I really love it.
And what do you have in plan with your podcast? Where do you think it's headed now?
So that's a good one. I have a couple episodes to record. I have a couple episodes. Um, I have a couple episodes recorded that were recorded live last year, and I think that's where, in the future, I think that's where I would like to go more, is like live podcasts at events. There's 100 million more stories that I could tell on the show. So if anyone's listening and thinking I have an interesting story, please reach out, because I would love to help you tell it. So there's all of that going on. There's still so many stories to tell there, and I just see it going and going and going, because there's no real end to the stories that you could tell. I also do, though, kind of see it allowing me more and more to go to events, speak at events, run workshops with different groups of people, to try and equip them with the skills that they need for either podcasting or communications, or to tell their story, or to just kind of, I don't know, feel like they can make a difference. So that's the other direction I see it going, is like there'll be the podcast always, and then there'll be these workshops running alongside it as well. So all of these things happening in tandem to kind of hopefully build both a knowledge base for people to draw on, right, with the podcasts, but also then giving them the skills they need to tell their own stories as well. So pushing both of these streams forward is kind of where I hope to be. And it's going slowly but surely. I helped produce a bunch of podcasts for a conference this year, so I can now officially say I'm a podcast producer, not just host and generally chatty person. So that's all very exciting, and yeah, I guess there's many dreams I have for it.
Interesting. Like it's a question out of curiosity, but when I think about doing lots of podcasts, I don't know, something in me thinks that won't I get saturated at some point, because I'm sticking to a particular niche of wildlife conservation. So like, how do you face that challenge, because you have done over more than 100 episodes till now? So do you have that fear that at some point it might get saturated because we are restricting ourselves to a particular niche of podcasting?
I think yes, I think I do, but I think I'm good at using. So I only put out maybe 15 to 20 episodes a year, right? So one every couple. What it would work out is maybe one every 2 or 3 weeks, and I think that the reason I do that is because it's just me, right? And I do the research, and I do the recording, and I do the editing, and then it goes up into the world, because I don't really have a budget and I don't have any of that stuff. And I know that I know I could potentially do more than that. I know I could, but I try and protect my own time, and I try and protect my own energy, and I try and protect myself a little bit from burning out, and by being like, okay, we're going to do this many. So I think in kind of protecting myself from burnout, I kind of allow it's kind of easier to keep going forward. That being said, I do have a couple ideas swirling around for other
Hmm.
series that are maybe like I don't know. Maybe something new or exciting or different, which are swirling around and will be produced at some point. So I will not say what they are, but they will be there. And then the other thing, I guess, like aside from those ideas that like keeps me going with this one is like every story I hear on the podcast is different, and every story I hear is unique. And whether that be the person's experience or the animal they're talking about or the conservation project they're talking about, I never get bored because I'm just sitting talking to someone who's interesting and passionate and wonderful. So, you know, I don't get bored of listening. I'm never going to get bored of hearing those stories. So it kind of works out well for me.
That's interesting. So, like, having done so many podcasts, I'm pretty sure you get to learn a lot about people's stories and wildlife. So, if I had to ask you, like, what have you learned after doing so many podcasts about people, about conservationists, and about wildlife? And I'll tell you why I ask about, like, why I ask separately about people and conservationists, because, like, I personally believe that when you're talking about wildlife conservation, people are a very important aspect of it. Like, you cannot talk about saving wildlife without saving or helping people. And
Mm-hmm.
that's why I like tend to be very interested in reading a lot of human psychology and just understanding how people work, but also being a wildlife conservationist, understanding how animals work, so I can find maybe a point where humans and animals can coexist. So that's why I really wanted to know, like, what have you learned about people, about conservationists, and about wildlife?
Mm-hmm. So I think, yeah. So I think for me, what have I learned about people? Um, People are good. Oh, that's a good question. I think what I've learned about people is that you have to meet them where they are. And what I mean by that is in the world of conservation and as conservationists and educators and all these things, the thing that we care most about a lot of the time is wildlife and nature and telling those stories and doing those things. And it's our number one priority. And yes, we have things going on in our own lives, but in terms of our careers, that is what we care about. And I think the main thing I've learned about people is that quite rightfully so, right? Because there are other things going on in the world. Not everybody cares as much as we do, right? Other people have other plates spinning, have other things going on, have other concerns or hobbies or interests or passions or whatever it is. And I think the most important thing about people and that you can learn about people is that you need to, if you want to make a difference for conservation, meet your audience where they are or meet people where they are, right? And that might be, um, for example, I from some of my guests, for example, who work in Madagascar. Like this year, I did an episode for World Lemur Day where the guests talked about how they had set up a kind of they had set up a community hospital to assist in conservation, right? And that doesn't sound immediately obvious as a conservation solution. However, improving improving human welfare and human lifestyles and human health is plays a huge role in conservation. So there's that kind of thing of like if you're implementing conservation projects, like that's meeting people where there are. As educators, that might be we're going into a room where there are 30 school kids all on their phone, right? So, what can I do as an educator? How can I meet them where they are and go, okay, have you found this cool app on your phone? Have you seen this cool resource on your phone? Have you seen this thing? And then use that to draw them out and maybe get them into nature or do these things or using their phone or whatever it is in a more environmentally friendly way. And just understanding that all of these different audiences have different needs and you're going to have to meet them
Mm-hmm.
where they're at, I think is the most important thing. What I've learned about conservationists is, and I guess it kind of goes hand in hand with that previous point, is what I've learned about conservationists is anybody can be a conservationist if they care and if they want to be. It doesn't matter if you are a scientist, a zoologist, a filmmaker, a photographer, a classically conservation-y thing, right? it doesn't matter. If you like talking, if you like painting, if you like music, if you like education, if you work in a bank, in a hospital, in a school, in a shop, wherever you exist and whatever you're doing, you can be a conservationist if you care and if you want to be, right? That could be outside of your work, doing things for conservation. So maybe going and volunteering for citizen science, maybe um, educating yourself about nature and educating others around you about nature. It could be, I don't know, if it's, and then it could be all sorts of things. If you are somebody who wants to do it as their career, but you think, oh, I don't have the skills, conservationists need capital, like all capital letters, need educators, they need artists, they need song, like people who make music, they need all of these things. So no matter what your skill set is, you can be a conservationist. You don't have to be a scientist to be that way. um, i I think the other thing that I've learned about conservationists is we all care so deeply about what we do. And I think the thing that I always like to say, and I really want all conservationists to hear. So if you're a conservationist out there and you're listening to this message, like I just want you to listen to, and maybe I'm wrong, and I'm happy to be told that I'm wrong. But the thing that I wish all conservationists would understand is that we are all maybe going about it in different ways, and maybe we are doing it in different streams and in different avenues and in different with different actions, but we are all aiming for a world in which nature is loved, in which nature is healthy, in which nature is thriving, in which nature is succeeding and excelling and, being the best. Like it's just given the space and the everything it needs to you know be nature and be everything that it can be. And I think so often infighting and squabbling and enemies are found in the wrong places, because we turn in and we look at each other and we go, why are they wasting money on that, or why are they doing this, or why are they doing that thing? And actually, if we came together more as a movement and as a kind of collective who want to advance, maybe we would still fall out, and maybe we would still squabble, and maybe some people would need to be challenged, and maybe some people would need to be knocked down a peg or two, and some people would have to be lifted up. But I think if we did a better job of unifying, we would do a much better job. So that's the other thing I have learned about conservationists, is that I think if we work together slightly stronger as a community, we would do more. And then the third thing, I'm really going on. What was the third thing? It was people, conservationists,
And
and
wildlife.
wildlife. I feel like, okay, this can be a short one because I've learned so much and I couldn't sit here and list all the things I've learned about wildlife. The most, like, I've learned that some people call tapirs little baby watermelons when they're little, and I love that. I've learned that um, I've learned that, what else have I learned? I've learned about using audio software to track where like lemurs are listening to their calls, and there's people doing that. I've learned all kind of amazing things about wildlife. The most important thing I've learned about wildlife, I think, is that, like, yes, in some places it needs our help and it needs interventions and it needs like a boost and it needs maybe a reintroduction here or a push here or a bit of funding injected here, a bit of education with a community there, or all of these things. It does in places need our support. But the most important thing about wildlife that I've learned and have grown to appreciate is that wildlife will be absolutely fine if we just leave it be. Right? If we can find a place where there is balance between what humans seem to think they need and wildlife recovers so often on its own. Forests restore themselves, reefs come back, like fish move back into areas where they have not been, if if they're given the opportunity to. And I think once we grow to appreciate that, and like we grow to like appreciate the strength of nature and how strong it is, that's something so wonderful. So that's what I've learned about wildlife. And I guess all of those things do kind of like link together with like meeting people where they are, and telling stories in the right way, and being, I don't know, just, I don't know, there's a link there between all of those things, and I can't quite make it myself right now, but I hope listeners at home are going, yes, that does make sense. All of those things I see, and if they don't, they can come and message me on Instagram and fall out with me. But yeah, that's what I've learned. That was a big long answer. I'm sorry, but yeah, that's what I've learned.
But yeah, I agree with all of it, and particularly about the people aspect. Like, sometimes we as conservationists tend to love wildlife so much that we tend to think that this person is wrong, they are doing bad for wildlife. But we need to understand, not every human out there is inherently evil or bad. Like, if they had to kill an animal, you need to understand from a more non-judgmental and empathetic point of view, like, why did they do so? Or if they failed to save this particular species, why did that happen? We're not only out there to understand how nature or habitat loss work, but why, what decisions people took, and why did they take those decisions for that species to suffer like that, and then how can we work with them to actually improve the situation rather than working against them, and for example pushing local tribes out of nature reserves and be like, no, you have destroyed it, we'll save it. That's funny to even say that, to kick someone out of their home and be like, we know better. Like, who are we to know better than them? So that's something I like completely understand and relate to. That's very well said, to be honest.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think it's something even like within the UK. I notice it something. I notice it a lot. I notice it a lot of like a little bit of discourse and argument can be good, right? And a little bit of holding each other to account is needed,
Right.
right? But there are some things where I'm like, guys, what are we doing as conservationists protesting each other? What? Why are we protesting other conservation organizations
Yeah.
when like there is a building just across the street in which, and maybe people are working out the incident I'm talking about from the clues, but there is just across a certain river in London where there is hundreds of MPs, for example, sit and do so little or make really poor choices about the environment. Why are we as conservationists protesting each other, right? In
Right.
a way that is bringing attention. Yes, it's important, and I understand that, and yes, I get it. But could, as conservationists, we not give each other an ear and sit at a table and talk about it rather than screaming at each other? Because when we scream at each other, that's when the negative forces that we've been talking about, right? That's when the politicians who don't want to do things, that's when the evil forces at play that we've ominously been discussing,
Yep.
that's when they get a leg up, and that's when they win, and that's when they do well. And it's infuriating sometimes to be like, guys, let's just talk it out. Come on. Like,
That's
we
true.
can't, we've got to be able to find common ground somewhere. And if we can find it somewhere, we can, go forward and go forward from there. But it's a tricky one. It's a tricky one.
That's true. Like, also, before we move on to the next question, like, I would highly recommend a book which relates to you saying about how maybe a scientist or maybe anyone in their own profession can still be conservationist. So there's this book which I'm yet to read, is known as Nature's Engravers. So it talks about the life of a guy named Thomas Bewick, who basically is a wood carver, but he portrays nature through his wood carvings. And it's like a really really thick book just on him, so I'm about to read that one as well, and it seems like really interesting, and how someone can talk about conservation and nature education through their work. So that seemed like a really interesting read, so I'm yet to read that.
Yeah, that sounds like a really interesting. And any story like that where someone uses a skill set that is not commonly seen, I'm always going to endorse and be like, yes, do that, do that. Like my friends who are artists, for example, when they paint things or make things or sell things or do things that are art-based conservation-y stuff, I'm like, yes, this is so beautiful and so powerful. Like when people sing songs or write music, or like I was lucky enough to attend an event last early 2025 about that you told the stories of birds through song, and it was just like the most beautiful. So anybody who does anything like that, right? Like I'm always blown away by the incredible skill.
That's great. So you talk to a lot of wildlife educators, I believe, and you give talks at events as well. So while you're talking to them, like, what do you feel like a lot of wildlife educators overlook or is not being done properly in wildlife education to reach out to people? What's something we can improve? Like, what's the suggestion as a wildlife educator yourself?
You've got me. You've got me answering all the hot button issues, and I'm on the spot because I've talked about politics, I've talked about protesting, I've talked about all sorts of stuff, and now I'm gonna. It's educators' turn. I'm gonna turn around and give some hot takes. No, I think wildlife educators and education. What can we do better? What can we do? Um, I think. So I know, well, I'll talk personally about what I can do better. I think what I can do better is I so often um like curse the use of phones, for example, in classrooms and in wildlife spaces. And I think what I need to do better is understand where there is value in them and understand where there is not.
Yeah.
And so for example, like when I'm teaching um in a wildlife garden or at a zoo or wherever, I like I usually am like phones away. No, no phones. Sorry, none. Because I like to have a moment where people can connect with nature and people can be in nature and hear the birds and look at the plants and feel the leaves and smell the flowers and do all these stuff without the distraction of screens. But I think there's a point now that we're at that has to lift
Mm-hmm.
slightly and it has to move slightly. And as a podcaster, obviously, a lot of what I do is digital,
Right.
right? So, but how I educate about that with younger children is really like I still haven't found the balance, right? Of like where is the right point for like technology to be in those spaces?
Yeah.
Because like I, for example, love and I think there's value in things like iNaturalist and Merlin Bird ID, for
Mm-hmm.
example, and all these things. Like I think there's exceptional value in those but I just haven't quite found a way to work it in a classroom setting or in an environment setting where I'm happy with. So
Right.
I think that's where I personally need to grow. I think as environmentalist educators, the thing is a movement we need to get better at doing, and I myself am included in this. And it comes into a little bit of my PhD work and little bit of the work that I'm doing at RZSS with the Royal Zoological Society of Scotland. A lot of it is about impact and assessing the impact of our work and evaluating our work. And I think a lot of what we need to get better at doing as a movement of educators is standardizing and training ourselves to properly evaluate the impact and evaluate the programs themselves like of our work and like what we're doing because yeah I think without doing that we risk doing the wrong thing and
Right.
it's I don't think we should reframe everything and spend all of our lives looking at statistics and all those things. Like there's ways to do it that are fun, right? With like mapping exercises or with what else? With like drawings or with journals or whatever. There's really fun ways of doing evaluation work that you can implement. But I think as a movement we need to get more on it with that sort of stuff. So yeah, that's my personal and
Mm-hmm.
professional things that I think we need to get a little better at
But
doing.
you mentioned like evaluating the impact, but I would wonder like what impact we're talking about here is more qualitative. So how do you evaluate such impact?
That's the question. That's the magic question, and no one has a good answer. No one has a good answer, right? That is easily usable or is widely used, right? Yet, there are methods out there where you can evaluate impact, right? There is, for example, INS and CNS are two different kinds of scale where you get people to rank their connection to nature.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there are methods of which becomes more quantitative, right? Because you get a number at the end.
Yeah.
Um, but I think that's one thing, right? But if I tell you, for example, right now, if I go, well, my kids went from a 1.7 to a 3.2, that means absolutely nothing to a policymaker, to someone who's got limited time. Like you could go away and read up what that
Yeah.
means, but if I tell you that's what they did, that means nothing,
Mm-hmm.
really. So I think without a huge explanation. So I think what we need to do is kind of get those numbers so we can see the growth and go, wow, my kids moved from a 1 point whatever to a 3 point whatever or 4
Yeah.
whatever, brilliant. But that needs to be paired then with the qualitative data sets.
Mm-hmm.
So um, things like as I said, the journal entries, the interviews, the drawings, the maps that then can be thematically analyzed or whatever, and pull things out, pull case studies out in a scientific way, and pop them all together.
Hmm.
And it's a tricky one, and it's not easily done, and I don't think
Yeah.
it's something that like requires more time and more resources
Hmm.
that some many organizations don't have,
Hmm.
but it's, I think, well worth doing. And it's something that we need to, yeah, I don't know, it's something that I think we need to start to yeah, I think we need to start doing more. And I think organizations, I think this is the other thing though, is I think that environmental education in these kind of spaces and qualitative data in general have not been considered science
Hmm.
for so long. And I think that require, and so this evaluation and impact mission, I think, is partially due to a desire to validate them, right,
Right.
and find a way to validate them. But actually, what that requires is not just these things on the educator side, it requires a greater shift, which will only come from other scientists and other
Hmm.
spaces within conservation and other spaces in the wider world, where we actually start to value our educators appropriately and properly and go,
Yeah.
the work that they do is incredible, and the work that they do is like a science,
Hmm.
and the stories they tell, whether they are um like, you know, whether they are scientifically tested or whether they're this, that, or the next thing, they are as valuable as any other form of science. So these
Hmm.
qualitative data sets are as valuable, and educators are as valuable. So I think it requires a general mind shift as well. So yeah, lots of big questions and problems there to start to unpick.
It's interesting. Like, just a bit about education again. So, for example, you're talking to maybe a crowd of 100 people who are not strictly conservationists or
Mm-hmm.
people related to conservation. So, when you're talking, like, as you talk in conferences, how, like, what do you feel really works when you're educating people to actually make them curious or, like, create that spark to, for them to initiate talking to other people or watching content to create awareness among themselves? So,
Mm-hmm.
what do you think really works from the part of an educator to actually be that inspirational to the people?
I think being an educator is, a lot of it is being a good observer
Mm-hmm.
and being a really good spotter of things. And that can be as simple as like, I was teaching at the zoo one day, and a little girl, I was stood next to flamingos, a little girl walked up to me. She was wearing entirely pink, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, there's the way in, right? There's the thing, right? We spot the fact that she's wearing pink. We go, I have a feeling your favorite color is pink. And then her face lights up as like, why, how did you know that? And I go, well, have you seen the flamingos? And then we talk about flamingos. And then we get the kid like standing on one leg and seeing how long she can stand on one leg. And then we talk about like this weird, wonderful bird that like does all these amazing things. Well, why does it stand on one leg? Why do you think it stands on one leg? Oh, that's interesting. Like, oh, have you seen like the little baby one? It's all gray. Like you get to put your pink clothes on every morning, and that makes you all pink. How do you think it turns pink? Like, how do you like find ways to observe who you're with and learn? And that can be on the scale of a kid coming into a zoo
Mm-hmm.
for the first time, or it's been in the position, I've been in the position where I've sat in boardrooms with people
Mm-hmm.
before who are high up in charities, high up in organizations, high up all over the place, and it's noticing what they care about and going like, huh, okay. And sometimes with those situations it requires more background reading and research, right,
Yeah.
to be like, okay, they're doing this thing, they're doing this project, they're doing this whatever, right? How can I meet them where they are, right? How can I sell this, right? For example, if it was podcasting and I wanted to kind of pitch a conservation podcast to somebody, or you know, something a bit different, it could be a case of being like, well, like, oh, this person is of an age where podcasting is novel and strange. So trying to meet them and be like, hey, do you like, what do you listen to on the radio, for example, right? And then translating podcasting into like, basically it's new radio, it's just on your phone, it's different. And then, well, what do you care about? What stories do you care about? Oh, that's interesting. I've never heard of a show. And trying to like, you know, channel their idea into something that's usable or passion, you know? So just being very observant with who you're with, and again, meet them where they are and go like, okay, cool. And I think like some of it is about accepting that, right? Like at the end of one interaction, that little girl, for example, or that CEO of an organization, neither of those people are going to necessarily walk away and immediately become entirely different
Yeah.
like individuals. That's maybe not going to happen. But what you want to do as an educator is move their piece just a little further along the
Hmm.
board,
Hmm.
right? You want to get it one step up, right? One further bit. You want to be that person who pushes them just that little bit further. And maybe in pushing them just that little bit further, you'll push them onto the tipping point and they'll then become, something like they'll decide when they grow up that they want to work with flamingos, or they as a CEO will implement some kind of biodiversity strategy or
Yeah.
climate strategy or something, right? It's push, 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 and then in a gentle way, and then hopefully you build these people who maybe don't even see themselves or maybe aren't even aware of the fact they love these things, but they over time have gotten there. And I think that's what us is, and again, that's why it's so important to be part of a community, because I know I can do that
Yeah.
little push, but we need everybody to be doing it. And yeah, I think that's what I hope for and what
It was a
I
very
see.
interesting example, by the way. I might steal some of it when I'm talking to children next time. That was a really good one. Because, yeah, I feel when you make things relatable for people, and then it's
Hmm.
easier for them to remember it as well.
Hmm.
So if that girl, if she wore pink the other day and she's talking to her friend, she might mention about flamingos maybe, and that's how the things keep on going. That's
Yeah.
that's really interesting. But we are coming to the end of the podcast. So before you go, because
Okay.
I really have so many questions about education, which I might still message you about. Because this particular incident, this flipped something in me because I'm yet to talk to a few school children in the next month. So I've been thinking like, what all stories can I tell them? How can I make them think about it? How can make them more curious about what they're up to like with the project. So yeah, that's very interesting. But before you go, I always ask my guests to tell all the other people, all the audience who's listening to this about a message of hope that they might have. So like,
Hmm.
what's your message for anyone listening to this podcast who might have lost hope for any reason?
Okay. So I think, okay. So we have talked about a lot
We
of
have.
big things, right? And a lot of big questions and a lot of big scary things and a lot of big confusing things, a lot, right? And I can see why now reflecting, I'm like, oh, if you're feeling a bit overwhelmed, that's okay. Because do you know what? Like, I feel overwhelmed all of the time. I feel overwhelmed by all of these thoughts and I feel overwhelmed by all of these things so often. Like so often I'm sat here going, what about this thing and what about that thing and what about the next thing? And then I'm staying up thinking about a thing and then I start writing stuff and I did it and all these questions spiral around and they do these big I have these big moments of like, oh, what is this? What am I doing? What's the point of it all? Um, and so the first thing I would say is to inspire hope is that like you're not alone. If those questions are the reason you came to this podcast, you're not alone. And there are people out there all over the world who have the same concerns as you do and care and love nature and want it to be healthy and want it to be happy and want it to be different and loved and cherished in the way that it deserves to be. So I think the first thing I would say is you're not alone. You're absolutely not alone. And the second thing that I would say is that if you still feel that way, the message that I always say, and I say it at the end of every presentation, and I say it um, kind of at the end of every talk and at the end of everything that I do and every opportunity I can get, I always tell people that when I was at university, I doing my masters, I was starting to produce the podcast, and I was starting to do this thing. Um, I was asked to do a presentation in front of a class full of people, and I was asked to it was all about puffins, and it was during the pandemic, so it was very strange. It was a Zoom presentation, and I gave this presentation, and I thought it had gone really really well. And I remember in that moment, right, like the lecturer, again, maybe this is why I have a thing about people in the conservation movement working together. The lecturer, who was a conservationist, sat up and went, mm, like, where are you from? And I told him where I'm from. It's a town in Fife in Scotland. He went, oh, that makes sense because and my town is, I love my town,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's my city now. I love it, but it is like in the part of the country that sometimes some people who are from very privileged positions would say is not that nice, but are wrong because it's great and I love it.
Yeah.
And he originally was like, yeah, okay, cool. Like, yeah, that makes a lot of things make sense, and it makes you make a lot of sense. And I was like, okay, cool, fine. Um, and then he went, and then there's you, and and people like you are quite loud, and they're quite boisterous, and they don't really know what they're talking about, and they
What?
don't really know what they're doing, and you just are childish, and you're this, and you're that, and you're the next thing. And I sat there in front of a class full of people, and I took it, and then I was like, okay, thank you, and I hung up the phone and was like, redacted swear words about this person. And I felt so demotivated because, like, I think when you're a kid who grows up trying to be like, you have a dream to do something, you build this up in your head, and you maybe you don't see yourself in that space, and you can't see yourself in that space, and then you build up this personality, and you build up these layers of things to make you get there. And in saying all of those things, what that person did was look right down the barrel of that camera and go like, you little boy who loves nature, this isn't for you, get lost, go. um and so I was devastated, and I felt vulnerable, and I felt upset, and I had the pandemic was going on, so it was a real spiral. And then my supervisor of my dissertation, I stopped doing the podcast for a couple of weeks, and she noticed, and she was like, "What's going on? Like, why is no work happening? What's happened? What's gone wrong?" And I explained the whole situation and how I'm childish in this, and I'm too excitable, and I'm whatever, and who I am isn't good enough, essentially. And she was like, okay, so all of those things are nonsense. It's all rubbish. You and that joy and that excitement and that childishness and the things that make you a bit different are exactly the reason why you will make a difference. And she said, like, protect your childlike joy, protect the love and the excitement that you have for nature, protect those things and remember those things. Always keep them safe, and keep that little fire inside you burning, right? Always. And that fire, if you can do that, will power you to go on and make change. And in hearing that, I was like, you're absolutely correct. You're absolutely correct, Monique. You're correct. And I went on and I produced the podcast and I did the thing, and I kind of forgot about that man. And I kept going and I kept going and I kept going, and I released the podcast and I did the thing, and I designed the workshops, and I made the kind of shows, and I traveled the world, and I did all these things, and I did a Pride Month series, and I get to be on a show where the person at the beginning tells me that the reason that they started this show is because of me doing mine and listening to mine. And all of those things happened. And all of that ripple of things is going to happen because I protected that joy. And I remembered that little boy who loved nature, who loved wildlife, who loved reptiles and dinosaurs, and then loved sea life, and then loved birds, and then loved all of these things, happened because I stayed hopeful, right? And I stayed in touch with that little voice and that little boy who lives inside me. Um, and yeah, I guess then the message of hope is just, protect that joy at all costs, and remember who you are at all costs. And if you ever forget, or if you ever think it's going away, take a step back, breathe, relax, take a breath. The conservation team, we have you. We got you. If you need to go away for a little while, we will watch your back. I know because they've had mine. Um, and yeah, we will together, if we do that, make an absolutely huge difference. So that would be my message of hope. in the longest, rambliest way possible, that would be my message of hope.
That's such a lovely message. And I would say that there is such a beauty to it because there was once a professor or an educator who demotivated you, but then you became an educator yourself and you're trying to inspire and motivate so many. So there's so much beauty to like just you pursuing a career in education and stuff. And that's lovely.
Thank you so much. And yeah, just to wrap up his story, just so everyone knows, I know for a fact he still teaches at the
Mm-hmm.
institution that I went to. And I've told that story at a couple of events, and I've never ever said who it was because I don't think that's appropriate
Mm-hmm.
to do. But I've now had 4 people reach out to me after talks or come up to me at talks and say, "Were you talking about X person?" And I was like, "Yep." And they were like, "Okay, yeah, no, we know exactly who you're talking about, and he is still the way he was." So he goes on, and he lives. His legacy lives on, but I hope my legacy is stronger because I give a hopeful legacy, not his awful one. Uh,
That's lovely.
no, so no, yeah, that's my. I guess that's my message. It's a very nice thing to get to share, but it's really weird. I still like feel very emotional attached to that story, and I think
Mm-hmm.
it's something that like I don't know. We should feel emotional about what we do, and we should care about what we
Yeah,
do. It's a powerful place to I don't know if we can. It's a powerful place to be.
that's true. I feel like conservation is all about passion and emotions. Like there was a professor who once told me, and he just joked about it. He was like, Harpreet, there are only two kinds of people who get into conservation. Either they are absolutely rich or they're just passionate. So like choose where you want to be. And I was like, that makes a lot of sense. But yeah, before we say bye bye, do you have any advice for me, or do you have any thoughts on the podcast? Any ending notes you want to share?
I have no notes. It was an absolutely wonderful conversation to have. For listeners, we met earlier, early 20, well, mid kind of 2025, um, in the National Museum of Scotland, and I was questioned extensively about podcasting. And I was like, in that moment, I was like, this person's going to go away. And I hope they're going to use all this advice because I think they have the passion. Because that way where sometimes people ask to meet for coffee or something
Mhm.
and then have no questions, or they're
Yeah.
like, they just wanted to get a coffee. And I'm like, that's cool. Like, yeah, nice. Cool. We'll get a coffee. We'll have a chat. We'll maybe talk about work a little bit. Like, you came in with questions. You wanted to get through things. You were like, and these are all the things I want to know. And I was so impressed when I walked away from that coffee because I was like, they have used the time that we have together to really make the most of that. And I was like, wow. So I knew walking away you would do something with it. And I'm so glad that this podcast is now
Mhm.
that the manifestation of that conversation. So no, thank you so much. I guess the only other thing that I would say is if anyone would like to listen to my podcast, I apparently it's inspirational.
It definitely is.
It's Pangolin, the Conservation Podcast. It's everywhere. You can find it. So just go subscribe and do whatever there. Have a listen. And I'm on social media at Pangolin Podcast and at the only Jack Baker on Instagram for me. So yeah, if you want to follow me anywhere, that's me. But no, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much. It was a great conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. It's been fantastic.